All right, welcome. Good afternoon. Let's get started. All right, so homework number 5 is due right now. Anybody else have their paper for that? Okay. Your next assignment, you have a week for that one, rather than the quicker turnaround that you needed for this assignment. How did it go with Excel? Easy, good, thumbs up. What about for those people who have never really used Excel before in this class? Anybody just have a disaster experience with Excel? Well, if you did, come and see me because I want to help you so that you love it as much as I do. I think I told you before that Excel is like my number one, program that I'd love to have at all times. So you don't need to bring a computer for Monday's class. We're going to continue just doing paper stuff then. And you do have an exam on the horizon, Monday the 26th of September. So I'm going to give you some background information about that exam. Just as a note, now we're in Chapter 5 of the textbook with the present worth analysis that we're going to be starting on today. So if you're following along with the readings, I think that's a really good study tool, especially since we have an exam coming up. So Chapter 5 is where we're at. Okay, so for the exam, it's going to be here in this classroom. There are 2 types of questions. You can expect concept questions where I'd be asking you to provide a short answer to a question, and then some that are problem solving. You can expect that there will be both equation method problems and also lookup, like the table lookup factors, problems of that sort as well. There won't be, though, any Excel problems, not for this exam. We may have it on exam 2. I haven't decided yet if that's practical, but we definitely won't have it for the first exam. It will just be 50 minutes that's available, so it's going to be relatively brief in length. I'll provide an equation sheet for you, and in fact, before the exam, I'll post that equation sheet online if you just want to see what it looks like and what the formatting is so that you don't have any surprises on exam day. All right, so that's the first exam. Any questions about what I've just told you? Exam 1? No? You'll notice in some of the in-class exercises I ask you to explain things. That's kind of practice for these short answer questions on the exam. In fact, today's in-class exercise, the last part of the question is I'm asking you to explain a trend. In the hustle bustle of talking with your classmates and it's kind of informal, as we do the in-class exercise, it's easy to lose sight of those and just leave as soon as you've got the right answer, like as far as the number goes. But problem solving is only a part of what you need to get out of this course. It's really understanding the underlying principles behind finding the correct answer. And so don't shortchange yourself. Don't leave until you actually understand the concept that is trying to be got at through those short answer questions. Okay, so thus far, you've just been learning some basic skills about the time value of money. Learning how to move money from the future to the present or into the future. And we haven't focused so much yet on decision making. That's what this class is really all about, is trying to analyze situations and then make the decision that's best for you or best for the company that you work for. So that's where we're headed now, is using some of the basic tools you've already learned to make decisions. For example, comparing alternatives. And this diagram is taken from the book, and it kind of graphically illustrates the decision-making process and some of the alternatives that you're going to have to decide between. So let's just step through some of the things that are depicted in this figure. First of all, at the top of the figure, it's illustrating sort of why you do projects in the first place. It says mandates, for example. If the management of a company says that we have to do a certain thing, then that's an example of a mandate. So there's these vague ideas, just information coming at you. For example, things you've done in the past, experiences, people's brainstorming. So the result of brainstorming is ideas, estimates for maybe just random information that's come in, estimates of how well things are selling or a need that is anticipated in the market. Just all sorts of information coalesces into a proposal. And then proposals are screened into not viable, which are sort of discarded. And then among the viable proposals, you have to decide whether, number one, the proposal has mutually exclusive alternatives or independent projects. We've got some vocabulary to look at on the next slide, but just briefly, a situation where you have mutually exclusive alternatives means that if you choose one of the options, you either can't or don't need to choose the others. So just for instance, if you have a driveway and you're considering both asphalt and concrete, you wouldn't choose asphalt and concrete for the same stretch of your driveway. That would be kind of pointless. You're either going to have asphalt put on or you're going to have concrete poured. So those are mutually exclusive alternatives. On the other hand, sometimes when it comes to investing, for example, you're going to have a lot of alternatives available to you, like a certificate of deposit, stocks, bonds, maybe mutual funds. And so those aren't mutually exclusive. You're not prohibited from buying stocks if you have a checking account or a savings account. And in fact, most people, as they begin to save for retirement, will have a wide variety of investment types just for diversity and to kind of cushion themselves against any unexpected fluctuations in one single category. So those are illustrations of independent projects. Now, in independent projects, that doesn't mean that you choose everything. You still have maybe budgetary limits or priorities that will make you pick one or more than one of the alternatives. But just because an alternative is viable doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it. Although, on this diagram, it may be too small for you to see. In both cases, in the case of mutually exclusive alternatives and independent projects, DN is one of the alternatives that you always have to consider, the do-nothing approach. That can sometimes mean the status quo. For example, keep owning whatever piece of equipment you already have. If you were originally thinking of upgrading, maybe a computer or a piece of equipment, just continuing to use the old piece of equipment that you already have is something that has to be the first alternative on the table that's being investigated. Or if you're trying to look for new investments and it all seems like there's too much risk relative to the reward, it's better just to keep your money rather than to invest it. So do nothing is something that you always have to choose as one of the alternatives to be investigated. Another classification that this figure is distinguishing between are situations where what you're going to do will generate income and it will have expenses. And private companies are usually the ones that face situations like these, where you make an investment at the beginning of a project and then get revenue coming in over time. But cities and governments often have to consider proposals where they're not actually going to be getting revenue from it. It's a cost-only alternative. So building a public park, for example, you don't pay to go to a public park. You just walk in. But it costs the city money to do that. And so later in the semester, we're going to be looking at how to compare alternatives when it's a money-losing proposition either way. Whether you're spending money on a public park or a flood wall, it's not going to generate revenue. But we still have to have tools that allow us to sort and rank and make decisions. So performing an evaluation is what you're going to be doing today with the present worth analysis. So here's that terminology that you need to have in the back of your mind, understand it well enough that you could define these terms. For example, if you ever had a situation where there was an exam or a quiz or something. So a mutually exclusive alternative, only one of the choices is viable, whereas independent projects, you can choose more than one. The do-nothing alternative is just the current approach or making no new investment. And then distinguishing between the two different types of projects, revenue and cost-based, or cost-only. And in a revenue project, that's the one where hopefully you're going to break even or even do better than break even. You'll have to consider a MAR in the case of the revenue-based project. But in a cost-based project, maybe the analysis is more about weighing the benefits with the costs. And the benefits aren't always financial. Sometimes they're intangible benefits like quality of life or like reduced travel time. Any questions so far, either about the diagram from the previous page This is a conceptual diagram. This isn't like a real-world blueprint of how decisions are made. It's just kind of to show you the process. Any questions about that or these definitions? I see many of you writing. That's great. I'll point out again that these notes are posted online. If you want to save yourself the hand cramp, you can always print them out. The notes are available on MU Online. So, okay. When you use present worth analysis, your approach is going to be take all of the cash flow diagram to the present. And the reason why you have to do that is sometimes your alternatives will have different lifespans. You may be comparing a piece of equipment that is going to last for 5 years with a different piece of equipment that's going to last for 7 years. And during those years, generating revenue and experiencing costs. And so the old phrase, comparing apples and oranges, comes to mind. If you're comparing items that have a different useful life, you have to sort of equalize them in order to have a consistent frame of reference. And so the approach here in the present worth method is to discount the entire cash flow to the present using the MAR. And what does MAR stand for? Good. Minimum attractive rate of return. And remember that the minimum attractive rate of return is a policy decision that organizations make. It can be private companies or governments. It's a decision that weighs several factors. You have to, number one, weigh what are the costs of acquiring capital. So if you are, for instance, taking out a bank loan, then a big part of what you choose as your minimum acceptable rate of return for projects is you want your projects to return at least as much as the cost of borrowing. So the interest rate of the bank loan would be the ground floor of your MAR. But above and beyond that, the variety of projects that are available and the number of good ideas within your organization, or maybe the market environment, the people you're competing against, all those things can go into setting the MAR. So there are two different ways we use the present worth method to help us decide. This is all about decision making. And so if it's a mutually exclusive project, then you would simply choose the project that has the highest positive present worth. Now, positive present worth means that when you discount all the cash flows, that means in the future there may be revenues and costs. When you discount them to the present, if the costs are greater than the revenues, then that means you have a negative present worth and you shouldn't do the project. In other words, that means the expenses outweigh the income. And you never do a project when the expenses outweigh the income, because it's like you're paying someone to do the project. So think about a contractor who is pouring concrete. If they agree to a job for $9,000 and it costs them $10,000 for the materials, obviously that's a bad position to be in. So that would be if you had a negative present worth. So if you have a positive present worth, that's good. It means that when you've discounted everything at your MAR, there's leftover profit. And so if you discount things to the MAR and you have a zero present worth, that means that your rate of return is simply equal to the MAR. But if you discount all of the cash flows to the present and you have a positive present worth, that means that your rate of return is larger than the minimum acceptable rate of return that you discounted the cash flows at. So that's for mutually exclusive. You pick one. In the case of independent projects, you choose all of them that have a positive present worth. So now that assumes that you have access to as much capital as you need. So if you have a limited pool of investing capital, then you can't choose every alternative, maybe. But as long as the bank will keep loaning you money for more than the MAR, and you discount the projects to the present, and you have a positive present worth, do the project. Choose all of them. Okay, so here is today's in-class exercise. On the back side of the paper, I've got the 10% factor table for you to use. And you're going to be comparing two pieces of equipment that cost a different amount of money And in this case, they both last for 8 years. And so we're not yet getting to the complication of how to handle different useful lives. The Mitsubishi and the Hyundai. It looks like the Mitsubishi is more expensive than the Hyundai in this case. It's an excavator that's going to last for 8 years. My cash flow diagram is probably the worst one in the room. As I was walking around, it seems like a lot of you have good cash flow diagrams. I just wanted to make one point, is that this is showing the full cash flow diagram with all the revenue and costs. A handful of you are doing the net cash flow diagram, which isn't wrong, but it's better to have like the full cash flow diagram in case one of the components changes. So say for instance, if the fuel costs went down, or if the estimated salvage value increased, it's better to visualize the individual parts and how they might change. But then it is the net cash flow diagram that you'll use when you are solving for the present worth. So for example, in part 2, you don't have to take 3 different annual series back to year 0. You can just find the equivalent net amount of the annual series and then take that in one step to the present. Now, there's usually more than one way to solve a problem. And here, I did an annual series with n equals 8. But I could have also done an annual series with n equals 7 and then combined that last amount that's in year 8 with the single f that's there. So you see this, for example, the 55,000. I could have combined that with the net revenue for that year of 43,000 and just had a larger f value, but that's not the approach I took in this solution. But that's not to say that it's wrong if you do it a different way. So there's 3 pieces to the solution for each, the present worth of the Mitsubishi and the Hyundai. In the case of the Mitsubishi, there's the 250,000 you have to pay is already in year 0. So that's a present value to begin with, and it's an outflow, so thus the negative sign, that negative 250,000. Okay, now the 43,000, that's the difference between the revenue and the costs. So that's why it's positive. And then P/A, 10%, n equals 8. So with that, you can go to the factor lookup table and get this factor of 5.3349. Now, keep in mind that how many digits there are in the factor lookup table limits how accurate your final answer is. So here that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits. Here there's only 4. So really, I need to round things off to the nearest dollar because this 20 cents, that's just a guess. That's not actually built into the precision of my solution. So I need to round that off to $5,058. So any questions about the Mitsubishi? It's the same approach for the Hyundai. The money-losing Hyundai, I should mention. Isn't it always? I don't know. No, I mean, Hyundai makes good stuff, right? Like monitors. You had a Hyundai car? The old ones weren't as good as the new ones. Okay. I wasn't planning on it. All right. But now I really won't. All right. So on the back side, I asked you to explain something. It said, how is the more expensive equipment, how is it that the more expensive equipment is the best alternative? Okay, so the more expensive is the Mitsubishi. If we go back to the problem setup, the Mitsubishi costs $250,000 and the Hyundai costs $205,000. So sometimes it's tempting at first to just buy whatever's cheapest. But what does the more expensive alternative get you in this case? Cheaper to maintain. All right, so let's compare the maintenance costs. The Hyundai's $22,000, the Mitsubishi's $20,000. So you have a higher recurring cost with the so-called cheaper alternative. And then the resale value, yep, the salvage of the Mitsubishi is higher than the salvage of the Hyundai. How is the salvage of the 05? $100? Yeah. And then the difference in the revenues as well. There's something about the Mitsubishi that's allowing this excavating company to earn more revenue. Maybe it works more quickly. It excavates at a higher speed, or maybe because of the lower downtime, since it's in the shop less, they can make more revenue. Now, a thing that I'm going to repeat over and over through the semester is this is projecting into the future. You know, here you are at the present, and you're assuming that you know 8 years from now how much you're going to be able to sell a piece of equipment for. I mean, that is wild speculation, but I mean, you really have no other alternative. You sort of have to pick an estimate or a range of estimates and do your analysis based on the best available data. But always in the back of your mind, remembering that how things shape up are only as good as your estimates to begin with. And so you can keep these on file and modify every year the projected profitability of equipment by altering what you expect the resale value to be. Maybe the resale market shifts slightly over time, or your fuel costs will change over time. And so later in the semester, we're going to learn about replacement studies, which is where you're analyzing existing equipment and trying to decide, is it time to sell the equipment or should you continue owning it? But for now, all we have to do is pick the alternative that has the highest positive present worth. And so if Hyundai was our only alternative, then what would be the solution, what would be our best course of action if we could only get the Hyundai equipment? The do-nothing alternative. Just go out of business. Don't excavate anymore, right? But if you can choose between the Mitsubishi and the Hyundai, the present worth analysis says that when you discount the cash flows at the MAR, this is your leftover profit, 5058. So if you were borrowing money at 10%, then that means you're going to have this piece of equipment for 8 years and only get a profit of 5,058 dirhams in this case. But presumably some of your expenses that are built into this cash flow diagram include a salary for yourself and, you know, your weird cousin who you employ. You know, there's other benefits besides just the bottom line of the cash flow diagram. But what this means is that over and above satisfying your MAR, there's additional profit too. Okay, now, so we've discussed the short answer kind of question, the explain. So be prepared to explain the why, you know, like looking at, you know, why is it that one alternative is better than another, trying to analyze where the extra costs come from and so on. Okay, before I let you go early so you can start your weekend, let's just refresh our memory that you don't need to bring a computer on Monday, at least not for this class, and then the next homework assignment is due on Friday. I always encourage you to get an early start on that. So let me know if you've got questions on the homework, and I'll see you on Monday.